everyone. I'm Ed Morin. I'm Amador County Master Gardener and your moderator for today. Thanks for attending the Amador County Master Gardeners Public Education Program on perennials, planting perennials and trees. Please be aware that today's program will be recorded and posted on our website and our Facebook page. Please leave yourselves on mute during the presentation. We will be taking questions at the end. Just type your questions into the chat to everyone. We'll collect them and cover as many as possible today. For your convenience, the handouts and presentation covered today will be posted on our website in the next couple of days. Look under classes and events, then handouts and presentations. If you wish to review the recorded presentation, go to our Facebook page and look for Facebook Live during the meeting or find the video link on our feed later. Next slide, please.
Okay.
If you have gardening questions at any time, please contact us. The UC Master Gardeners of Amador County are working by phone and email to answer your questions. You can contact us by phone 209-223-6838, by email mgamador@ucanr.edu, on Facebook at UCCE Amador MG. If you are not located in Amador County, we strongly recommend that you direct your questions to your local Master Gardener program. You can find them by doing a web search for UCCE Master Gardener and your county name. Okay, housekeeping is done for now. I'm going to turn over control to our presenter for today. Maureen Engel has been a Master Gardener since 2014. She lives in the Lake Comanche area outside of Ione. She is interested in growing California natives and drought-tolerant plants, and also the science of healthy soil. Maureen is part of our public education team that provides classes to our local home gardeners. Today, she will be giving tips on planting landscape plants in the fall. It's okay, Maureen, it's your turn.
Okay, thanks, Eduardo. I want to thank everybody for attending our class this morning. And as Eduardo said, I hope to give you some information about what you can plant at this time of the year. And I apologize, I've got a little bit of a frog in my throat this morning, so if I have to do some clearing, I'm sorry. Autumn is a great time here in the foothills. Oh, let me step back a minute. This presentation is primarily designed for Amador County, where we live. But I live kind of at the interface of the valley and the foothills. So a lot of the information is applicable in parts of the Sacramento, San Joaquin Valley, as well as the foothills. So today I want to talk about the fact that autumn is a great time to plant a lot of your landscape plants. And that could be your trees or shrubs, perennials, especially California natives at this time, and even a few bulbs. So I put a few examples on the front page, but let's get to the information. Fall planting, you might think that because we're kind of putting our summer gardens to bed, that the fall is a time where we really don't do much in the garden, but it's actually the opposite. If you set yourself up well in the fall, the spring will be great in your garden. And fall is a good time because it gives the plants a head start on growth and a chance to establish good roots. Many trees and shrubs that are planted in the fall have a noticeable increase in growth in the first year if you compare those to ones that you planted in the spring. It's interesting, if you buy a 4-inch pot of something now and put it in the ground, within a year or so, it'll catch up with something you might have bought as a 1-gallon pot. So it's economical to plant in the fall. Autumn day, and this is why. Autumn days are shorter and they're a little cooler. It's starting to cool off around here. And those conditions allow the plants to retain the moisture in their leaves and in their roots in the ground. But the soil is still warm. I meant to take the temperature of some of my gardens today and I forgot, because it's obvious that the ground is still warmer than the air. So that helps the roots get established. The healthy root system is the primary thing you're working on in the fall, because that will then support a full-size plant come spring. And hopefully this year we'll get some rain in the winter that will soak the roots and help the plant develop this system. So it's all about establishing the roots in the fall, because some of the plants may not have a lot of obvious growth to you because the growth is going on underneath the ground. Now in spring, if you plant in the fall and the plants get a good start, when spring arrives and the weather warms up, then the plant can concentrate on growing leaves and the above surface part of the plant, but the root growth will continue. By summertime, if you stay on a schedule like this, it gets very, very hot here where we live. And so by summertime, the plant has a well-established root system, and so it can supply a lot more water and nutrients to the plant compared to when the conditions are very, very hot. And I'll show you an example of a big mistake that I made at planting at the wrong time of the year. Oh, I put it on this slide. Also, plants that if you plant in the fall, the plants have a well-established root system, so you don't have to water them as much in the spring. And here in the foothills and parts of the valley, once the weather warms up, some plants don't do as well when you water them a lot. They develop root rot. Spring planted plants have better roots. I'm sorry, I said that backwards. The spring planted plants do not have well-developed roots, and so you end up watering them more, kind of playing catch up. And that when you water a lot and it's warm, that can lead to fungus diseases that are in the soil. So fall planting is recommended also for most California natives, because California natives are used to our weather. They're used to the fact that it doesn't rain a lot in the summertime, but it does rain, hopefully, in the winter. So just by the way the California natives live in their ecosystems, they're affected by the fungus that are in the soils if there's too much water. So we're going to talk a little more about that later. I put in one of my many mistakes here in this picture to the left. Where we live, we're up on top of a ridge, and there's a very, very strong wind comes off the valley. And so my husband and I decided, we looked around the neighborhood to see what other people had done, and we decided to plant these Italian cypress trees as a wind block on the side of our house. And it's far away enough from our house so it's not a fire danger. But we bought several of them and they were growing great. We put in a couple each year. So then the nursery where we'd been purchasing them, because the man had been raising them himself, well, they were going to go out of business. So we raced over there to grab a couple more of the Italian cypress. But it wasn't the right time of the year to plant them. And it was spring approaching summer. It was already getting warm here. We really hesitated, but we put it in the ground anyways. So these two were not planted at the same time. But this is the tree that we purchased at the wrong time and planted at the wrong time. And it has never caught up. It needs extra water all the time compared to the other ones, and it's smaller. But this summer, the temperatures were really extreme here at my house, and every day in July was over 100. And this tree just couldn't take it. You can see it's not doing well at the top. When you get up close to it, it doesn't look as healthy. But we're not going to take it out, but it takes a lot more care and water. And I don't know if it'll ever look as good as the ones that we planted at the right time in the fall. And trees can be expensive. That's an investment that you want to do correctly. You want to plant them at the right time, depending on where you live. Now, one way to kind of get some guidance, much of this presentation today is to kind of point you in the right direction to help you decide what should be planted at your house. There are we actually live in climate zones, and there are two main maps that people use to determine what kind of plants will probably live at their house. Now, the first map is put out by the USDA, Department of Agriculture, and they call it a plant hardiness zone map. The problem with this is it's based solely on the temperatures, the highest highs and the lowest lows that typically occur in that region. They just revised this map a few years ago. And I don't find it real useful, but I'm going to point it out to you and I'll show you why. Because temperature alone does not determine what's going to survive and do well at your home. A good example would be, I live outside of Ione, so I use Ione for the location on the map, and they have us in zone 9B. Well, Jackson, which is also in our county, is also in 9B. Ione has a elevation of about 300. Where I live, it's about 400 feet, but 300. Jackson has an elevation that's more than 1,000 greater. When we go up the hill to Jackson, we go up more than 1,000 feet. And the plants that do well in Ione just simply don't do as well in Jackson and further up the mountain. So I just want to make you aware of this, but I'll show you the map that and when you buy plants at nurseries or some of the big box stores, they will often note the zone on it. You want to take a look, is that the USDA zone or is it the Sunset map zone, which is the one a lot of us use because it's a little bit more specific. Yes, it's Sunset Garden magazine and books, that company. Well, they put out climate zone map, and it includes California and Nevada. But their maps are based on, they take into consideration the temperature of the area, but also the latitude and the elevation. Like I said, if I live at 400, plants that grow at 1,400 are probably not going to necessarily do well here. But if you live near the ocean or inland, the continental air influences make a huge difference in what will grow in your area. The coastal redwoods are a good example. They're beautiful, beautiful trees, but they call them coastal for a reason. They need the temperatures, they need the daily fog. They do not do well in the dry areas, such as the valley or Ione. Mountains, hills, and valleys, the topography of California makes all these little niches, and some things grow well in one place, but not the other. That leads us to what we call microclimates. Again, because of the topography of California, it's not a flat state. There's lots of nooks and crannies. We have a lot of what we call microclimates. I definitely have one at my house, being on the ridge and the temperatures I get. And you might have one at your house. So you want to make yourself aware of that. Sometimes with them, if you have a microclimate, you can kind of sneak over to a different zone because you can use plants from more than one zone at times, especially if you're kind of on the border. This map also takes into account the growing season. I used to live in Southern California, and you can grow a lot of things all year long. Doesn't matter about what season it is. However, here in the foothills, it matters a lot because there's such a huge temperature change. And depending on if you live in far Northern California or way down in San Diego, the daylight times are a little bit different. So it doesn't change your growing season drastically, but you do want to be aware of when the best times. Around here, people will say they don't put their tomatoes in the ground until after a certain celebration, which is in June. But where I live, I put my tomatoes in the ground in March. So It really depends where you live in California as to what your growing season might be. And then soil isn't directly related to climate, but it does influence what plants will grow where. So it's important to know about that. And this map takes that into account generally. So on this map, they have the area of Ione, which again is around 300 feet in zone 9. And that blends out into the valley too. A lot of the edge of the San Joaquin Valley is also zone 9. But Jackson and Sutter Creek and some of the areas more upcountry, they're zone 7. And that's far more appropriate for choosing plants. And then we also have another zone in Amador. You get up above 3,000 feet, you have special gardening situations there, but that's zone 1A. So you can look for plants that are specifically designed for 1A. And not to give a commercial for anyone, but it is easier to buy from vendors that use these climate zones, but they will specifically mention whether it's Sunset or USDA. It is helpful for you to kind of get a start on what plants would be appropriate for your neighborhood. And that's a good technique also. If you're looking to see what might grow in your area, take a drive around. Look at what your neighbors have planted successfully and maybe what doesn't look so hot. Okay, now, master gardeners have wonderful resources to help you decide what you should plant and where you should plant them. Now, I'm going to start with kind of trees and shrubs. One of my favorite websites is the University of California Garden Web. And you can see on the menu here, there's a lot of different topics, but I want to point you to the landscape, trees, and shrubs. Now, we're not, due to lack of internet strength, we're not able to have live clicks on here. So I've done some screenshots on some of these pages that I think you would find helpful. So let's go to the next one. Okay, if I clicked on landscape, trees, and shrubs on that previous page, I would come to this page. Lots of clickable information to help you get started in how you should choose your trees. And the shrubs kind of go with this too. This is right here. This is mainly tree advice, but the shrubs, a lot of the same information applies. So you can look through here. There's a lot of good information to help you decide. And then there are other sections on shrubs and perennial vines. You can see roses and then a couple other things. So this is a really good start. Now, we get a lot of questions into the Master Gardener office from people who are either redoing their landscaping or perhaps they just moved here and they want to plant some things. One of our favorite websites to use for ourselves and help with clients, but also to direct people to is this website at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. It's the Urban Forestry Institute. And whoops, I just clicked something in front of me. And they have a lot of different subjects that are interesting and helpful, but the one we use a lot is this select tree. And when you click on that, you'll get a page where you can search for the trees that you're interested in or that you hope to purchase or hope to plant. And you can kind of go through all the variables the tree might have and click or not click and choose them. They ask you the tree height that you're looking for, which is important. The shape, what kind of leaves do you want it? Do you want it to have leaves or do you want it to be a pine tree? Is it a native? Right now has fall color. You might be interested. A lot of people in my neighborhood have trees that kind of change color during the year and it's real pretty. But other things on this that are important for us to consider is power line friendly, because PG&E is out and about cutting down trees for a good reason. But also, this website will ask you questions about the root system. Do you intend to plant this tree right next to your driveway or by the sidewalk? Because there's certain trees you want to avoid for that. It also has information about whether they're fire resistant. No tree is fireproof, but some trees and shrubs do seem to be somewhat fire resistant if the fire doesn't get too hot. So you can choose what kind of tree would fit your neighborhood. And then it'll give you a list of trees they suggest for you to investigate. Really helpful. You can, if you can't find what you're after, you can kind of change the variables and see what it gives you. Not all the trees are California natives. That's one variable you can choose, but this has been heavily researched as to which trees do better in California. Great website, really, really useful. The links to all of these pages that I'm commenting on are in the resources, and then some of the documents will be available when the PowerPoint is available on our website. But you can also just Google some of these names. They're very commonly used, so they'll come up real easily. Okay, now, if you have the misfortune of having to pay a little bit better attention to your Firewise landscaping, the Master Gardeners actually in a lot of the foothill counties have a lot of great information about how to replant your land, either after a fire or when you're trying to plant fire-resistant landscaping. A very good website to take a look at, though, is a CAL FIRE website on preparing for wildfire. You can find diagrams that explain the zones of what kind of plants you should plant close to your house or not, what kind of trees and plants you can plant at a little more distance, how near or far apart to plant certain trees and shrubs so that you don't have too much debris on your property. Some of the Master Gardeners, oops, I didn't mean to do that, I'm sorry. The Pluma Sierra group, they have a demo garden where they've already planted Firewise plants, and you can go out and kind of see what they look like once they've been grown. But this website does have a good list of fire-resistant landscaping. They've got a good list of trees that they recommend. And there's nothing wrong with planting some of the big trees, ponderosa pine on your property if you have the room for it. But certain trees, like ponderosa pine does great up country in the higher elevations, but it doesn't belong in the valley. So great information here as far as how to make your property a little more fire resistant. Okay, now I'm going to kind of move from trees and kind of blend it into shrubs. If you're looking to plant shrubs and some of the trees in this area, there's two great documents that'll give you some really good guidance. And this is put out by the Tulare and Kings Master Gardener Group. The first one I want to talk about is a little booklet, online booklet called Shrubs for San Joaquin Valley and the Foothills. And then the second one will be Ornamental Tree Selection. You notice I'm only talking about landscape plants today. That there is still time to be planting some of your winter vegetables and your veggie garden, but we're not going to go into that in this presentation. Okay, the Shrubs for San Joaquin and Valley Landscapes is a little 35-page online booklet, lots of planting information, diagrams and pictures to show you how to plant your trees and plants. I'm going to show you a couple too. And then the part I like especially in this is the pictures. They have a number of, they're almost like little index card pictures, and it has the plant name, how to pronounce it, has the common name and the biological or scientific, the Latin name. But then it gives you good preliminary information about whether you want to choose this plant or not. The butterfly bush, wonderful, beautiful plant. But notice, they do get 12 feet tall. I just had to remove one because I had no idea when I first planted it that it was going to get quite that tall. And I think I probably could have pruned it to keep it a little bit smaller, but I didn't know that at the time. So it's important when you're planting your trees and shrubs especially, they come in a little 4-inch pot or even a 1 gallon. And they look, okay, I can handle that. But you might not realize that some of these trees and shrubs grow to 10 or 20 feet tall, or they might even be, pardon me, they might even be 10 feet wide in full growth. So you want to make sure you're leaving room for that. The sun requirements or shade, very important if you want the plants to be successful in flower. I have an Oregon grape along a fence, but I didn't realize it was going to need so much sun. And so it doesn't get enough sun. It only gets the plant looks pretty, but it doesn't get very many flowers on it compared to others that I've seen. I should have planted that out more in the sun. The water issue is going to be really big for everybody. It already is a big thing in everybody in California, but I know in our county, they just raised the water prices. So everybody needs to be careful about what they plant. One of the reasons here on the butterfly bush, my mouse isn't working. Here we go. On the butterfly bush, it says moderate to regular water. That bush needed a lot of water in my backyard. In the heat of the summer, if I didn't water it every other day or so, it was really, really drooping and looked awful. And I can't have a plant in my yard that needs that much water. It's just not reasonable. So I wish I had known that about the butterfly bush before I planted it. I might have chosen something else. So when it says moderate to regular water, they mean it. Is depending on where you're going to live in the summertime when it's hot, it's going to need a lot more water than maybe some other plants wouldn't. Now they vary. Some of them are evergreen. They keep their leaves all year long, but others drop them. So when you're designing your garden, that's going to matter to you. So these are the kind of information documents that you want to pay attention to. They give a little bit of a description of the plant itself, but I especially like being able to see the color of the flowers and the water requirement for my garden right now. And another thing is that here, like the plumbago, they'll give you comments about it, like recovers fast from frost damage. I don't get too much frost here, but my colleagues in Master Gardeners upcountry, they have to deal with frost on a regular basis. So those little hints are really valuable when you're choosing your plants. Now, the other document in that section is called Ornamental Tree Selection and Guide. And I just picked up a little bit here. I'll show you a couple of the pages. That's a 12-page document. And again, this one also gives a lot of general information about trees and where and how to plant them. All good, all good. Talks about trees that have obvious flowers and some that don't. But what I like in this document is the list of trees they provide. They have several pages of trees that are commonly grown. Again, this is geared for the San Joaquin Valley where it's hot and dry, and the foothills where you get a bit more moisture. The soil types are completely different though in the foothills compared to the valley. So you want to pay attention to that also, depending on where you live. But in this document, they give you great information for making your decisions. The common name of the tree that you would recognize, and then its botanical name. When you go out to buy plants, if you really care about getting a specific kind of plant, you need to write down that botanical name, because a lot of them are similar but not the same, and you won't end up with what you thought you were going to. So you don't have to necessarily be a Latin expert, but if you really are determined to get what you want, make sure you note the botanical name. But it'll give you important information. The mature size is how big or how small is this plant going to get. And when they say 25 feet, they mean it. I planted a ceanothus that was close to 15 feet, and I had no idea it was going to get that big. Just because I'm a master gardener, it doesn't mean everything I do in the garden works out well. But it's interesting to see what happens. Water needs, again, I can't emphasize that more. You need to know that before you plant. For one thing, you want to plant plants that have similar water needs in the same area. Like you don't want to plant a tree that doesn't need a whole lot of water in the middle of your lawn. The grass is going to need a lot, if you have a lawn, the grass is going to need a lot more water than the tree might. So it's important to know what the water needs are in these trees and shrubs so that you can kind of group them. The growth rate is important. We get, although fast is relative, we get a lot of questions in to our phone line. Somebody moved here. There isn't a lot of landscaping on their property. It's hot and they want some trees fast. Well, it's easier said than done because it still takes years for trees to grow tall enough to give you a little bit of shade. But it is important information to know what the growth rate is. Also, whether it has flowers, inconspicuous. So you're not really gonna see the flowers or enjoy them. The flowers on my blue oaks, they barely qualify as flowers, but they're doing the job. But they're not maybe what you imagine for flowers on your plants. So it's good to know that before you purchase the tree and before you go through the trouble of planting it. Tree shape is important. Do you want this for shade? Do you want an upright tree? It really depends where it's going to go and what you want it for as to what the shape would be. Potential problems are good to know. Again, the roots, if the root system is extensive and can cause problems. Summer dormancy. The California buckeye is a very strange tree. It is green, I think, first in the winter, but it also goes brown first in the summer. And it kind of looks dried out and dead. When I first moved here, I thought there was something wrong with those trees, but it's a natural cycle. But you need to know that before you plant one on your property. So there's several pages of very good information about the trees that the master gardeners in this area recommend. And they're not all natives. A lot of the trees that we have in our yards are not native Californians, but they still work quite well here. Okay. They also, in this document, have a very useful page of what not to plant. And that doesn't mean you might choose this, because I'm going to have some positive and negatives about a couple of these, but it's good to know if some of these apply to your area. There's a number on here: does not tolerate valley heat, does not tolerate valley heat, short-lived in hot valley climates, excuse me. Those are definitely, you need to pay attention to that, and you don't want to be planting that if you live in a hot area. Those are the kind of trees I kind of avoid. Invasive, that means it'll spread easily. That may or may not be a problem for you. Like this silk or mimosa tree, the negatives are lots of litter, prolific self-seeding. All that's true. My next door neighbor has one, and it's a beautiful tree. Yes, he has to rake up a lot of debris. Yes, those pods blow over to my house. But we haven't had any mini mimosa trees popping up any place. And it's really a beautiful tree when it's blooming and it gives shade. It's very, very nice. So just because there's a negative listed, you might still choose that tree, but you're just going to be ready for it. But don't go for something like this white birch in this area. Short-lived, doesn't tolerate valley heat, susceptible to borers and aphids. You want to know that up front. That's probably not something you're going to invest in. Okay, now the actual process of planting your tree, and this pretty much applies to the larger shrubs too, is you want to take a look at your planting site and kind of evaluate your soil conditions. You don't have to do a fancy soil type unless there was some unusual circumstance on your property. Excuse me, if you'd had some kind of toxic spill or something that would actually get into the soil, you might want to know that. But other than that, you're really just looking for kind of your average soil, but it needs to be loose so that the roots can get through that. So you may have to break through, kind of loosen up the soil around the planting area a little bit. In this area, some people have what's called hard pan, which is like almost some cement. It's clay soil, but it's so hard. It's been so compacted. It's almost like cement. You might have to get something like an auger to dig through that. You may need some heavy tools to get through some of that to allow for the water movement so the roots can get into the soil. Several of the master gardeners around here, a lot of us live on what they call a volcanic cap, is we have soil on top, but maybe a foot or two down, it's volcanic material. And I know my next door neighbor and some of the master gardeners have commented they had to rent a jack and jack through, really hammer through the soil itself to break up the soil underneath and the rocks underneath to plant some trees. So don't be surprised, depending on where you live, if you have to kind of go to some extensive methods to get the soil ready. But you don't have to add a bunch of products or anything. Don't start off doing that. The basic way you plant these trees is to dig a hole that is about twice as wide as the root ball, but not deep. You want the hole to be about as deep as the pot that you're taking the tree out of. And with this, I'm assuming you're buying a tree that's in a 1 gallon, or which would be better. It's better to buy trees in smaller. It's better to buy trees when they're younger. Trees that are in the 3 and 5 gallon containers tend to have their roots bound. The roots have gone round and round and round in that pot while they were living in it for several years, and that's not always a good thing. You should actually try to buy smaller trees if you can. I don't have this in the picture, but if you can, and the nursery will allow you to do this, if you can pull that tree out of the pot and look at its roots, that's the best thing you can do for yourself and for the tree. Because if it's too root bound, you want to choose a different tree. But you dig the hole about twice as wide as the root ball and about as wide. And then place the root ball, the tree in the hole. And you want where the tree meets the soil, you want that to be up just a little bit, few inches above the surface. There will be some settling when everything's done, and you don't want your tree in a puddle or a pool. You want it to be up a little higher so that there's good drainage. It's possible that your young tree will need some kind of support. The ones in this picture are a little weird. I like the ones in this picture better. Is up here, these are flexible. And the digging the hole is all the same. But if you have a young tree that might need support for a few months, you don't want to leave these supports up too long. But you put 2 stakes to the sides of the tree, and with some flexible material, either regular material you have. I have some stretchy tape I use because I did have to support a tree just recently. 2 pieces kind of gently supporting the tree up pretty high, where the tree won't bend above it. You want to support the middle part of the tree and leave that on for, it really depends on the tree, 3 months, 6 months. You don't want to leave it on too long because the tree needs to learn to stand by itself. But the support will help the trunk develop while the roots are developing. Now, the picture on the left is one of the master gardener, actually one of the teachers. And this is a good example. I'm not sure what she's planting there. It looks like some kind of shrub, might be a tree, but the directions are the same. Her hole is about twice as wide as the root ball here, but not too deep. Now, what she's going to do is fill the hole back in with the soil that she dug out, the native soil or natural soil. Okay. Right away in Amador, that presents a problem because when you dig that hole, in most of our backyards, half of it is rocks that comes out. So you don't have enough soil to fill the hole back up. And we get this question a lot when we talk about these in classes. What we suggest you do is save any of the soil there to the side that you dug out, but get yourself some good garden or potting soil and mix it with the native soil. Make a little bit of mix and then put that in. Don't put a separate layer of just potting soil around your tree, because when the roots start to grow out, that's not what they're going to normally grow through. You want them to start growing through the type of soil that they're going to live in. So you don't want a layer of potting soil and then the native soil. If you don't have enough native soil to fill the soil back in, do a little mix with some good garden soil, good potting soil. For me, I just go over, my yard's big enough, I go over and dig a hole someplace else in the yard and get soil to fill my my holes up. So it really depends what works in your yard. Now at the bottom here, I just planted, I took some things out that were not water conservative. They just needed too much water for what I think is going to happen in my backyard in the future. And I'm replanting a number of them. Some I'm replanting the same plant, but I'm going to deal with it differently. But one strategy I've come up with that works well for the smaller plants is I have a lot of buckets I use that have no bottom. And I'll put one of the buckets around it for a few weeks. And it helps kind of protect it from the wind. And I have a couple chickens that roam around sometimes. But I have a big problem in my backyard with the wonderful sparrows, the white crowned sparrows that I do love. They eat the heck out of my small plants sometimes. They'll come and eat the little tiny leaves. So I put my buckets around my new plants for, like I said, maybe a couple weeks. And it also helped when I had already planted a few things and it got really, really hot again. And that ended up giving my brand new babies a little bit of protection from the environment. Worked out great. I also use them when I plant in the spring, because as soon as I put my peppers in the ground, the wind comes up at that time of the year in my yard, and this protects them from the wind. Works out well. Okay, now shrubs. I'm going to move kind of from shrubs and into perennials because they look very similar. The shrubs, technically, woody plant with several stems, no dominant stem or trunk. Usually they're less than 10 feet tall. They're basically what we call a bush. Now, there's a lot of shrubs in my neighborhood that are well over 10 feet tall. The toyons and some of the other plants that grow around here are over 10 feet, but I mentioned that it's really windy around here, and a lot of people have larger shrubs planted at strategic spots on their property to help shelter the wind. Now, perennials, which are usually a little bit smaller, okay, by definition, they live in the ground for more than 2 years, and their flowers return each year. But there are a couple things about perennial plants, especially some of the California natives that we do promote to help the pollinators, but that you need to know before you plant them, because you might not like what happens throughout the year with some of them. And again, the same thing with perennials. If you buy them in the smaller pots, that's more cost effective than buying them in the 1 gallon if you don't have to, because they will catch up. It's pretty amazing, but the smaller plant catches up to the larger one very quickly. Oh, perennials are in the ground for more than 2 years. There are annuals whose you have to pretty much plant each year, but there's biennials. So there are a few annuals that takes 2 years for them before they have flowers or anything, but then they'll die off. So I put a couple examples of some of the perennials that are growing in my yard, and they don't look that great right now, because that's what happens with some of the California natives and some of the other perennials. They have like a life cycle that some of them go through, at least in appearances, and sometimes it may not be the look you want for your yard. I love my California buckwheat. It's really overgrown. It's one of the few things that has flowers on it in the fall, this time of the year, for the pollinators, but it can kind of get out of control. So you want to keep a close eye on some of these. The California fuchsia, this doesn't look so hot right now because it's seeding. I just took this picture the other day. However, again, at this time of the year, it's one of the few things in your garden that is still blooming, and the flowers are very beautiful, real pretty colors, and the hummingbirds and the other pollinators really like them. if you plan it right, you can have things blooming in your garden all year long. The same plant doesn't bloom all year, but different plants will step up in their life cycle and they'll bloom. So it's good to know that so that you have some plants in your yard that are good to draw pollinators. Okay, now, kind of the good and the bad. Perennials, typically the plant will die back, or I should say often. Often the plant will die back after it's bloomed, but the roots will survive throughout the winter. And then the plant just regrows in the spring. So you need to know that when you're designing your garden or choosing these plants. And I threw in just a couple examples. So again, at this time of the year, my plants don't look as great as they do perhaps in the spring, but I don't want to hide that. I want to show you that so you know what the expectation is, because I actually love most of the things I planted. So in this case, this is, oh, and I'm sort of a free range gardener. I'm not real linear with my gardens. I kind of have places where there's a lot of plants, just kind of all mixed together because I'm trying to draw pollinators to that area. So in this picture, I know it's hard to tell, but there's a couple purple sages here in the front, and then there's a rock rose behind it. Now, those plants stay green, and there are various shades of green, but they stay green all year. So they don't have flowers all year, but they stay green. So that looks nice in your garden. Same thing with some of the salvias I have. They stay green all year. They don't bloom all year, although they bloom a lot. If you water them, they bloom. They get a lot of pretty flowers on them. But they are a green plant in your garden throughout the year. And this is a baby one. I just planted this just recently. But an example might be the Shasta daisy here. I haven't finished taking all these out. This piece right here is a dried out, not dead, but dried out piece that bloomed this year. So I'm going to be taking those out. But already, even before I can cut down the used up pieces of the plant, the new plant is growing back here at the bottom. There's already all kinds of little green shoots and leaves coming up underneath the finished part of the plant. So that look pretty dried out and ugly for a few weeks, but it's already coming back. So I'll remove the dried out dead part. They're not really dead. I hate to say that, but they're dried out, they're used up, but the roots are still good. So that plant is going to come back and look green now. And my famous example is my fuchsia flowered gooseberry. This is what it looks like right now. And I'm still taking out the used up parts. It's beautiful in the spring. It's a fairly large perennial, has long fronds and beautiful fuchsia flowered flowers, fuchsia colored flowers that the pollinators really love. But when it's done for the year, it's done. And you end up with kind of a really ugly dried out plant for a few months. And then what you do is you hard cut it down a lot. I'm still working on these ones. And then the green will begin to grow back. Now this is a little piece of one, because I want to make another comment about this. And it wasn't very large. I'd already trimmed out a lot of the used up part, but it's already regrowing green. So in the winter, this will be green. But this summer, my husband kept asking me when I was going to take it out because it has big stickers on it. But I was just biding my time because I knew it would come back. But you probably don't want something like this in the front of your house because it looked really ugly for a short time of the year. So you need to know this sort of thing before you plant a lot of these plants. What's going to stay green all year, if that's what you want, what can kind of move through more of a cycle of green and brown. Another thing about some of these plants, and this is one of them, is some of them are what they call invasive because they spread a lot. And this one spreads underground. So I started with one good sized plant that started in a 4-inch pot. And now I have about 4 of these little ones growing around them. So I'm going to take a few of those out. So that's another thing. If the no description of the plant says it's invasive. That's the sort of thing they mean, is it might spread where you don't want it to. So good to know that up front. And here's a place you can find out some of this. One of the websites that we use to recommend plants, because you can get real specific to where you live, is the CalScape website. And that's put out by California Native Plant Society. So most of these are or all of these on here are natives. Now, what's neat about this site is you type in, you go to CalScape, you type in your address, and I put in the address of where our office is up in Jackson. And it's going to list, going to give me some of these plants. Oh, I put in the address and then this is what I got. I'm sorry, did that backwards. I put in the address and then when I clicked, this is what showed up. And it shows on the map approximately where we are. So you can kind of see the terrain. And this is the list that CalScape gave me, 586 plants that are native to the Jackson general area. And then they break it down into the types. So I went for the perennials, and that was on this page. So in that part of Amador, about 185 perennials that are native will grow in the area. Either they're already growing there or you can plant them. And then I didn't click on all these for this presentation, but when you click on these, it gives you the specific information about that particular plant. 185 perennials is pretty good to choose from. So this is a great website to wander around and see what's out there and what could grow at your house. And another good website, they are in the valley, so some of the mountain people have some comments, some negative comments about it, but I find this website really useful. UC Davis Arboretum and Public Garden has put together several lists of plants that they've grown themselves. They've tested them out at Davis and other field sites. They don't just test just in Davis, they do test around the state. And they've come up with a list. Here's a starter list. They call the Arboretum All Stars, and they picked 100 of them. So when you go to this site, you'll find this document that in this one, the All Stars, lists 100 different plants that they've grown that they recommend for us. Again, gives you this time it's given us the biological name, the Latin name first, and then the common name, and then a brief description, but it does have some of the important parts. Provides a lush look in dark, shady areas. Can tolerate high mineral irrigation water. All of those things are important. A lot of people up here have wells, and there's a lot of different things in their water, so it's good to know. So they give you a brief description, and they have a whole lot of these planted around the Arboretum. Yeah, they have a lot of different display gardens there. So if you're over there, you can get a look at what it looks like when it's grown. We don't recommend commercial anybody, but a lot of the local nurseries, if they have room, they have things like this grown. There's a great nursery here in Amador called the Flower Farm, and half of the grounds are the plants full grown. So you can walk up to them and see what they look like, and at all different. You can see them also throughout the year to see how they change. So there may be some nurseries in your area, or master gardener demonstration gardens in your area that you can see these plants. But in this one, they give the size and whether, I think I missed, oh, here we are. I've got something that's on my screen that's blocking the titles. Okay, it gives you here it has the sunset zone. That's off the sunset map that I told you about. And so that's very useful to know if you're planting something in the right area. But size, bloom season, again, ideally, you would like something blooming in your yard all throughout the year. And it is possible to make that happen if you combine different kinds of plants. Exposure, how much sun, Pruning, a lot of these plants do need to be pruned in some manner. Like I'm getting ready to cut down my California fuchsia, cut to ground after flowering in late fall. You literally cut it all the way down to the ground and it all grows back. So if you didn't know that, you might not have as productive growth next year. And then water needs, these are speaking to the water needs. So all the basic parameters you need to help you choose the plants and to see what they look like when they're flowering. Okay, planting perennials. It's not like there's any big secret, kind of typical planting. You water the plants that you're going to plant if they're in the container. Perennials like loose, well-drained soil, that can be in a container or on the ground. If it's in the ground, you may want to sprinkle out a little compost. Oh, a key, when it says well-drained soil, that's a clue you can plant that on a hillside. And here in Amador, almost everybody has a slope on their property. There are very few of us that don't have slopes in areas like the planting. If the description says well-drained soil, that's one for your slope. It'll grow elsewhere too, but they're great for the slope. Okay, if you buy it in a container, just similar to the shrubs, just smaller. Just dig a hole that's a little wider than the container, but not deeper. It's good when you take the plant out of the container, kind of massage the root ball a little bit, kind of loosen up the roots, spread them out a little bit. And then when you put it in the hole, same thing. Backfill the hole with the soil you dug out if possible. If not, mix a little bit of potting soil into it and then press firmly. Again, you want the plant to sit up just an inch or two, a little bit, because when you water it, it will settle down and you don't want it in a puddle. You water it well to begin with, but not too much. And then some of these plants actually come as bare root plants. When you buy them, the plant shows on top, but the roots are in a little bag of sawdust. So if you get one of those, just wash out the sawdust, soak the roots maybe in an hour or so in water in a little bucket, and then go ahead and plant those just like the others. It's a good idea for all of us to put mulch around a lot of our plants. You don't want to cover all the area in your yard or your garden with mulch because you want to leave some bare for the native bees, but the plants will do better and hold on to the moisture if they have a couple inches of mulch surrounding the plant but not touching the base. Now, California natives, a lot of them are perennials, but some of them take a little bit of extra care, but it's well worth it because the native plants in California were here before we were. They're the foundation of all the different ecosystems that make California such a wonderful place to live. And these plants have over time developed actual relationships with the other animals and insects in the area that they live in. They are the food and shelter. And shelter includes some place to reproduce and for a wide variety of organisms. The native plants can serve to draw other animals into your garden. And I find that they fit the climate better than a lot of the other perennials, and probably because they belong here. So you want to choose wisely. Just because it's a California native doesn't mean it'll grow any place in California. Some of the natives need dry areas, some of them need cooler areas, some need shade, just like any other plant. So I made that mistake when I moved here. I chose some California natives that grew where I used to live, plopped them in the ground here. I'm still trying to grow a woolly blue curls. I've killed 3 of them so far because I just can't figure out if it can grow here or not. And so you just because the California native doesn't mean it will grow just anywhere in California. But you can plant California natives as seeds right now. Get yourself a handful of wildflower seeds, toss them out, you'll have some poppies next year. So, or you can plant them as plants. So these are easy to plant. They have their ups and downs like any other plant as far as when they bloom or when they look good. But they're a wonderful addition to our gardens. And I know our group, all the master gardeners, are promoting pollinator plants, plants that they're pollinators, and the butterflies, the bees, the hummingbirds will be drawn to. You can find out great information about the natives from the California Native Plant Society. They have a wonderful website, everything you'd ever want to know about native plants. It's also a good place to look for native plant sales, which are happening now, but will end pretty soon. I know I was lucky, I lucked into a plant sale for the Sacramento Valley Native Plant Society. It was an online sale, ordered my native plants, drove over to Elderberry Farms and picked them up. So there may be some native plant sales in your neighborhood at this time, but the big box stores and the nurseries have plenty of natives if you look. And California Native Plant Society has a new movement going on called Bloom. They're working with the big box in our nurseries to have more native plants for us to buy, because that's been a big issue, is finding them. So the Bloom stores will be having native plants for us, and that's happening right now. Okay, again, we don't recommend commercial. We're not allowed to do that. But if you want information on California natives, La Politas Nursery in Santa Margarita, it's down south, has wonderful information on their website. All kinds of pictures. They tell you all about the plant. One of my favorites, I like the sages and salvias. They grow well in my yard, so I'm always buying more of those. Not necessarily from Las Politas, but I go and look at what they have to say about them. Excellent information, lots of really great pictures. There's pages and pages on salvias, for example. So Las Politas, you can order online from them. They're out of a lot of stuff like everybody else right now, but they're a wonderful resource for information, real quick and easy on California natives. And like I said, great pictures. Okay, we're going to finish up here with, let's not forget about planting a few bulbs in the fall. If you plant bulbs in the fall, they will grow some in the winter, some in the spring, and a few in the summer. Depends what you plant. When you choose bulbs, make sure to get big, firm, clean bulbs, nothing with little brown spots or rotten places. And typically larger bulbs will produce more flowers than smaller bulbs. You can buy regular bulbs you may have heard about, like freesias and daffodils and tulips. But you can also buy, in California, there are some native plants that grow from bulbs. And I put a couple of the pictures of the pretty irises up there. That you can get those through some of the native plant societies and from just the common nursery online companies like Annie's Annuals has some plants, and Peaceful Valley, any place like that. But you do just as well to go down to your local nursery or big box and grab a bag of bulbs and plant them out in your yard. It's wonderful. You can plant them in your yard, or you can plant them in containers. I think I have one more page on this. Yeah. They like well-drained soil, but they do great in containers. We have a couple bulb experts in our group. I'm thinking of Marie. She plants all her bulbs in containers, and that way she can move them. She lives where the weather's a little bit more worrisome, but she, in the springtime, she's always bringing daffodils and all kinds of bulbs that she's cut to the meetings. Now, it depends what kind of bulb it is as to how you plant it. They all go kind of growth point up, roots down, but how deep you plant them depends on the plant. So check your package. You'll be a lot more successful. First time I planted bulbs, they didn't come up at all. And I think I probably had them all like 10 inches down or something. I didn't know what was wrong until nothing happened, and I started digging around, and things were way, way deeper than they needed to be. Now, watering's a little tricky. Water them when you first put them in the ground, and then just kind of leave them to nature and let the rain or snow take over, because too much watering of bulbs will cause them to rot. Now, one last comment, I think, on the planting them is some bulbs, the plants that grow from them are delicious to gophers, and they'll eat the bulbs too. So this is a little hard to see. This is not a bulb plant. This is a Mexican petunia I had that the gophers ate, the big plant. And then I broke some pieces off and did some cuttings and managed to get a couple new plants going. But when I replanted them, I put them in a gopher cage. And if you don't know what that is, it's like a flexible wire basket that you actually plant down into the ground, and then you put your plant in it and then fill it all back in with soil. I like my gopher cages to kind of poke up a little bit from the ground. I don't like them buried too deep. I want to know where they are. So you may have to plant some of these in gopher cages to ensure a plant in the future. Now the Sacramento group has put together a wonderful chart, because not all the plants that grow from bulbs will grow everywhere in California. Some of them need more sun or warmer temperatures, so here's a great list of common bulbs, plants that we grow from bulbs, when you should plant them, and a lot of them it's now, how deep to plant them, which is really important, and spacing's important. A lot of the bulbs you can group really close together, some you can't. When you should expect them to bloom, and if you plant it right, you can have things blooming in the winter, the spring, and the summer from the bulbs. And then comments about them. Things can be grown in large pots, good cut flower, things that you can and can't do with the bulb. So this is a really, really useful chart, and it'll be in on our website with the PowerPoint when it's done. And I think that pretty much finishes up the kind of overview I wanted to give you of the different plants, landscape plants that you could plant in this area at this time of the year to get them off to a good start. So let me click to my resources. The different websites I used are referenced here, plus a few of the books. It's hard on Zoom to, hold up a book and show it. But if you're going to get anything, start with your Sunset Western Garden book. That has priceless information in it as to about the different plants, not just California natives, just things that grow in California, and lots of good pictures, planting information. And they have some sections on what they recommend for a windy area, what they recommend for a shady area, for all the different circumstances that could occur in your microclimate. They've got something to recommend. And then there's a couple other books that I use when I research for planting in my yard. So I included those there. And I think with that winds it up for me today. So I want to thank you for attending, and do you have any questions? So Lori, I'll turn that over to you.
Right, thank you, Maureen. We have a couple of questions from Chloe. First, if you plant California fuchsia this fall, do you still cut it down to the ground at the end of fall?
I don't think so, because I don't think there'll be enough growing to worry about. If it has flowers on it, how long? It would depend how long it's been in the ground. If you think, because remember, if you cut the plant down, you're going with just the roots. So if it hasn't had a chance to establish roots, just leave it be. It's okay. It won't hurt it. It'll still be there, and it'll still bloom next summer. Wait until it's already done its thing. Like my California fuchsia, there's actually a bunch of seeds coming off it right now. So that tells me it's finished. So I'm going to cut it down.
Okay.
I wouldn't cut a new one though.
Also, do you happen to know if the Amador Flower Farm sells California natives?
I don't know. I know that I have seen a couple there. They don't have a section for it, at least not last time I was up there. And I was up there, I don't know, maybe a month ago. They don't have a separate section for it, but what you should do is ask them for them when you're there, because that's the way to get, they're really responsive to the public. If enough of us ask for California natives, then maybe she'll get some more in.
And Geraldine says, yes, they do. So
okay, great. Thank you. I know I've seen a few, but I don't remember them having like a native section.
Okay. If you have any other questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. We've got a few more minutes here left.
And if they don't have a question now, they can always send it to us to the email address that we put up, or just Google Amador. And you can, Amador Master Gardeners. You can also send your questions to your own Master Gardeners. Most of the counties have them.
Okay. I don't see, oh, all right, we've got the email address up there. Thank you, Tracy.
Thanks, Tracy.
All right. I don't believe there's any other questions. So Ed, I think I'm gonna, oh, will we send out the recording? It will be posted on the Master Gardener website sometime this week, Tracy. I'm gonna let you answer that one.
I'll have it posted on the Master Gardener website by the end of the week, so by Friday. And I'll put the link in chat. We also have a YouTube channel, Central Sierra YouTube channel, and it will be posted there.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Maureen. Ed, I'm gonna give it back to you.
Okay, thank you so much for attending our presentation about planting trees and perennials. Remember, this presentation will be posted on our website early next week if you should want to review it. Happy gardening.